Hello, I'm Miss Jackie, and this is Word for Brothers, dedicated to lifting up our black men where they belong, primarily as head of household. Having our men at home can help prevent our children from being face down in the street. If you like, please go ahead, subscribe, and share. Now, many times a child comes into the world and takes on the role of a parent. Due to everything from substance abuse to being straight up trifling, this thankless task is foisted upon a child who sees it as his or her duty to keep the family and things together. This is Jonathan, Saul's oldest son. You know Saul, Israel's first king, tall, dark, and handsome, a son of wealth and privilege, straight from central casting. Saul had one brief and shining moment in 1 Samuel 11:6 when the Spirit of the Lord came over him and enabled him to save the people of Jabesh Gilead who were aligned with his tribe. After that, it was all downhill. Even before Saul's anointing, 1 Samuel 10:27 says, "But certain worthless fellows said, 'How could this man save us?' Worthless they may have been, but not too stupid to have peeped a disaster in the making." Saul was lazy, vain, a coward, with a blase attitude toward obeying God's commands. It wasn't too long before he began to prove those worthless dudes right. Finally, God got sick of him and through his prophet Samuel told Saul, "You're fired." Now, although God had David waiting in the wings, Saul refused to get off the stage. He refused to let go of what God had already taken from him. Ultimately, he brought the curtain down on his entire family. Now, Jonathan had a different spirit. He was everything his father wasn't: brave, decisive, righteous, and secure. He was a young man with an old soul. When it became clear that David, not him, would be the next king of Israel, Jonathan accepted God's choice, not as a loss for him, but a win for Israel. After David killed Goliath, Saul's sense of entitlement became more apparent and his disconnect from reality grew. But Saul refused to take his meds, including a big dose of the truth, God's truth, becoming more paranoid and unstable. And the person who walked hand in hand with him into his descent into madness was Jonathan. Now, David eventually escapes Saul's murderous plans and becomes an anointed fugitive. In chapter 20, verses 30 through 34, we find Jonathan trying to reason with his father. However, by this time, David's military wins, his rise in the polls, made reasoning with his father, unreasonable. He rages at Jonathan, screaming that as long as David lives, he will never, ever be king, meaning Saul would never have a legacy. Saul cusses Jonathan out, calls his mama a whore, and tries to kill him. Jonathan gets mad, ups and leaves, only to return to his father's side. Despite Saul murdering priests he suspected of siding with David, enlisting the aid of sworn enemies to the nation, running himself ragged after a lost cause, Jonathan loved and remained devoted to his father. Saul spends the remainder of his life fighting the Philistines and God, the latter by any means necessary. Once upon a sunnier time, Saul had banished witches, warlocks, and other reps of the dark world from the land. But with the Philistines pressing upon his army and him with shaky boots, he goes to a witch and asks her to call up Samuel, the dead prophet who in life had tried to be his mentor. Samuel tells him bluntly, "Man, it's too late. You ignore God, but he will not ignore your fate." The word doesn't say if Jonathan was with his father doing this last desperate act. And if he had been, what could he have done? So Jonathan followed an unfit Saul unto a battlefield to fight the Philistines who killed him, his two brothers, and Saul, later cutting off his head. 1 Samuel 30, 1-10. Now, Jonathan left behind a 5-year-old son named Mephibosheth. By who, though? When? There's no mention of a marriage, by the way, that Saul should have arranged. Not a word about a wedding celebration. But then again, how could Jonathan have ever made a commitment to anyone other than his dad? She was probably someone he felt comfortable with, someone to get away and be himself, away from the stress of home. A mutual understood relationship of convenience. Now, when news reached home of Jonathan's death, Mephibosheth's nurse panicked, grabbed him and started running, but dropped him, causing his feet to be maimed. It could be said that Jonathan spent so much time and attention trying to manage his father's issues that his own son got dropped long before his nurse physically did the same. But this was the second generation of benign neglect, since Jonathan had dropped his own life. Mephibosheth lived like his walk, painful. Without David, he would have been on SSI. He was given to low self-esteem, depression, and at times taken advantage of, maybe because he got dropped. And Mephibosheth had a son himself, Micah, mentioned once in a short sentence. Not much to say, echoing perhaps a largely unfulfilled life of all he could have been, just like his daddy and his granddaddy Jonathan. It is said that we should die empty, but not because we've allowed someone to suck all the life out of us, no matter how much we love them. And may we uplift and praise our men who have learned to put up guardrails in loving their crazy fathers to keep themselves from falling and failing, not only themselves, but their sons and daughters as well. Well, that's it for now. This has been Word for Brothers. Remember, we ain't hating. We all about celebrating and elevating the black man. See ya next time.